So I am joined by Esther O'Reilly, Christian humanist. She's been dubbed the kid sister of the intellectual dark web. Great to have you on the livecast.
Thank you for having me, Glenn. It's a pleasure to be here.
Who gave you that title, the kid sister of the intellectual dark web?
You know, it's one of those things it's like the calculus. Several people independently came up with it, and so
Wow.
uh, and then Paul Vanderklay sort of jumped on the bandwagon, and now that this is it's, it's his thing now. But I don't actually honestly remember the very first person, but a couple different people have claimed it, I think.
And who is staking out the membership of the intellectual dark web anyway? I mean, who's actually in this group?
I don't even know anymore, and people are already saying that it's like dead, like it's not even a thing so much because there's been some infighting, and the various members are beginning to kind of go their own separate ways, and so it's already like a super 2018 thing,
Right, right.
which is, it's funny because I was commissioned to write an article about the IDW for the launch of a new Christian magazine called Permanent Things. It'll be coming out this month, I guess, by Owen Strand. And it was months ago that he commissioned it. And at the time, it's like, ooh, we'll get like a Christian cultural perspective on this hot new thing. And now I'm looking back at the article, it already feels a little bit dated, but that's the church. We're always like about a year behind everything.
Yeah, that's right. I'm thinking of my next fidget spinner video just to really engage with the kids. And...
I know exactly. But if you want to, I mean, people can find. I did an unbelievable episode with James Croft, it was kind of a weird hodgepodge where we went all over the place. But Justin asked me to talk about the IDW, so you can get like, it's a little time capsule of my thoughts at that time, which it would have been like around fall of last year.
Yeah, would you say it's kind of classical liberals who've had enough of the left going too far? Like, how would
you could put it that way. You could also say it's a bunch of Jews yakking in Dave Rubin's living room. You could say like,
yeah.
Which I think that's fair. I talked a little bit in my second unbelievable thing I did with Neil Shenby and James Lindsay. I said that I saw guys like Bret Weinstein as sort of old school liberals, where they're progressives in a sense, but they're like, wait, this isn't what I had in mind. Like, what's going on here? Wait a minute, kids, we're taking this too far. There's an interesting socio-political argument that could be had about whether Bret Weinstein may have sort of set the table with the knives that were used to stab him. But I viewed him as like just a good bloke who was just doing his job and being a good teacher, and then just got blindsided by this. And now the way that he and Eric both have sort of described it is that they've got like a little PTSD from how the left sort of treated them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that they're conservatives exactly, and I wouldn't even call Jordan Peterson a conservative. Like, I've seen some people say that. I'm like, not really. I see Peterson as still relatively liberal, but he's ticked off with leftism. So that's where I think a lot of these guys are. And then you've got people, so like Douglas Murray, who's not American, and so he gets sort of left out of these conversations because the British political landscape is just a different ball of wax from the American political landscape. But I've been, I think, more interested in Murray than maybe some other commentators have been, just because I think his ideas are really interesting, and in some ways because he's a neoconservative, which has a certain meaning, I guess, in the British political landscape. Which means that some of his ideas somewhat align with mine as an American classical conservative, but in other respects we might diverge. And so I definitely plan to be doing some more writing on his stuff one day. My dream is to debate him, maybe on one of Justin's episodes.
On what topic? What would you take on Douglas Murray on?
Oh my goodness! I suppose, can we still believe? Which is sort of the problem that's been kind of haunting him, I guess, because, he's a sort of, if you've read the poem Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold, is this sort of very romantic ode to lost faith. And so Murray is that sort of, he's like this classic archetypal 19th century romantic deconvert. So like while Steven Pinker is going, enlightenment now, are you coming, Douglas? Douglas is like, no, I have a very important poem to recite on Dover Beach.
I need to look up to the horizon and
Yeah,
wistfully. Yeah,
exactly. Well,
yeah.
that's the word. I think wistful is, and
Mm,
I think he's writing a new book. He'll be coming out this September, and I expect he'll be expanding more on this. But Douglas wants. He feels like something has been terribly and irrevocably lost
mm,
when Christianity and Christian faith was lost. And he's a humanist at heart, and so he feels very strongly about human dignity and human value. And he sees these disturbing things like right to die legislation and whatnot. But he realizes that there's no real way to ground that outside of a Judeo-Christian framework. And so he's in this liminal space where, the best that he can do is be a sort of a Jeremiah type,
mm,
figure. But he himself still feels like he can't believe because, Darwin and Strauss and higher criticism and
mm,
all that. So, of course we can't be rational believers. That's all been and done, blah, blah,
mm,
blah. And,
yeah.
that's partly where I can come in because it's like, well, or no, actually you missed a spot. But
Right.
that's another
Right.
story.
Yeah. And do you get the same sense with Jordan Peterson as well? That's yeah,
Somewhat,
yeah.
although I think Peterson may be more optimistic than Murray. When I sort of look at the two of them, because I think Murray is sort of, well, he's a journalist and Peterson is an academic. And so, uh, so Peterson, I think, still has, he's still trying to cling to this optimistic view that's like, yeah, but we really we can make the world a better place. And maybe we can't save the world, strictly speaking. Like, he's not a utopian in that sense, but we can put the world together. And, God only knows what we
One
can.
individual at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. And he'll keep saying, you're unbelievably, there's more light in you than you know. And God only knows what we could be or what we could do if we lived up to our full potential. And that's the city on the hill that we're striving for. Is that
Striving towards, yeah.
exactly? Oh, it's sort of like the maximization of virtue, I suppose, is his utopias, where virtue is maximized to its greatest possible extent, and virtue and truth telling. But I don't know. Well, it's that Pelagian soteriology plus Augustinian anthropology that's kind of
Right.
clashing there.
Right. Yeah, very good way of putting it. Because
I stole it from Paul.
oh, really? Yeah. So Paul van der Clay, he's been, who got onto Peterson first, Paul van der Clay or you?
Paul did. He got into Peterson because of the Bill C-16 stuff, which I wasn't
Mm,
really aware of at the time. And then I separately saw the Kathy Newman interview when it went
mm,
viral, and that sent me down the rabbit hole. So that
mm.
was, and then like later after that, I found Paul and began enjoying his commentary. So
Okay. And so where do you see, so Paul van der Clay has a phrase about Jordan Peterson, the status rocket has gone up into the stratosphere,
yeah.
and he's unreachable now. So it is quite the phenomenon. I guess I got a few questions around that. Like what does it tell us about the culture, first of all, that Jordan Peterson could become a YouTube phenomenon?
Mm. Alter spends way too much time watching YouTube. I don't. That's a very good question. I think this is a generational thing to some extent, but I think it may also say more about certain pockets of culture, possibly, than culture writ large. Because
Sure.
I'm part of the extremely online community, right? And so to some extent that puts a bit of a filter on what people think is important or what
Mm,
people are really into. So um, there is still like a huge chunk of culture, so to speak, that has no idea who Jordan Peterson is or who any of these intellectual dark web kind of guys are. So I think that the Peterson phenomenon could tell us something about certain specific demographics. So I think it can tell us something about younger guys, um, specifically younger guys who are of a more sort of intellectually curious or restless bent, um, and more specifically younger guys who are in professions like IT or tech, for example, who have a lot of time to listen to things while they're working on whatever they do.
mm,
Um, that's a phenomenon that Paul has kind of noted in just his sort of canvassing of the types of people who reach out to him. That's kind of the professions that they come from, and they'll say that's how they got hooked on Peterson's. They had all of this sort of dead time, in a sense, in their coding or whatever. Got to find something to listen to, and then okay, here's this interesting character who's talking in a sort of a fun, mysterious way about archetypes and psychology and stuff. And so that's a demographic that the church hasn't always been necessarily done a great job of reaching, because it can be a demographic that has ADD when it comes to regular churchy type things, and they can be sort of turned off by jargon, or turned off by like small group church culture, that kind of thing. So they kind of tend to sort of drift off and poke around and find stuff on their own that seems to resonate better.
So it is important to say that the IDW is a dark web phenomenon. So it's
not
online.
the greatest name.
Yeah. So it's kind of a counterculture. But it is interesting in that it taps into what people might be thinking in the house next door to you. When you've got mainstream media saying this is the agenda, this is right think.
Exactly.
We all know what wrong think is, and nobody who's in their right mind thinks that. And probably pretty much your neighbor probably is disagreeing with that right think, actually. But you've got
definitely.
a movement like the IDW that comes along and just names. I mean, it strikes me that one thing that would kind of unite the IDW, and there aren't millions of things that would unite the IDW, but one thing would be, just to say something like giving hormone blockers to a 9-year-old. That's kind of child abuse, wouldn't you say?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so the trans issue in general, it's been really interesting to watch how even people who sort of like slept through Obergefell or slept through the advance of gay marriage are suddenly waking up with the trans agenda and going, wait, no, what just happened? What is this? Excuse me? Wait, no. And like even like gay men are saying that, or lesbian women are like, totally. wait, stop. This is insanity. And like I, as a conservative Christian, might say, yeah, well, okay, but there is then kind of a conversation to be had going back to the gay and lesbian stuff. But hey, for now, yes, absolutely, we can agree. We can find common ground on this. So like, Douglas Murray is a gay man, but he's bang on when he talks about the trans agenda, the trans insanity, and so that's right, naming the madness,
Yes. So that even if the IDW is not particularly well known, even if your average person hasn't heard of Dave Rubin,
right.
Nevertheless, it at least shows that there is a platform and there is an audience for people just standing up and saying, "Wait, no, this is crazy."
Right, exactly, and the other important thing too, and I tried to emphasize this back in my Unbelievable chat, but I think my point was maybe lost on my opponent. But specifically, I think there's an audience of people who actually aren't particularly political, but who just sort of naturally, in the privacy of their own minds, feel like this is just common sense. And now these new norms are being forced on them, where it's like, well, you're a terrible, hateful, bigoted person if you don't go along with this. It's like, I didn't think I was a hateful, bigoted person. I thought I was just going along, minding my own business, being a regular kind of, yeah. And so that, I think that's a misconception about the kinds of people who might be attracted to what the IDW is saying, is that, oh, they must be like these reactionary alt-right type people. But actually, no, a lot of times they're just regular people who'd like to be able to be left in peace to believe common sense things about stuff.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it really struck me. I don't know if you picked up about John Cleese. So John Cleese put out a tweet just last week saying, I've often opined that London is not a particularly English city, and all my sort of overseas friends have agreed with me that that is indeed the case. London is not a particularly English city. And I also note that London was strongly voted to remain within the European Union. And like, what on earth is controversial about that? like, like, and yet it's had 11,000 retweets and people just like losing their minds over this and seeing racism everywhere in this
because
idea.
because they think that he's implicitly saying something about Islam, or
race. Like he's saying that London isn't particularly English. He must mean it's not particularly white. That must be, and we must be able to discern his motives, which are impure, and therefore we're going to convict him of a thought crime on the evidence of. There's no evidence, but we're gonna impugn his motives, and
Oh, here we go.
Here we go, and we're going to excommunicate him, and it's kind of frightening because he's an incredibly famous, popular comedian who's now 79, and like not even he's safe from just being totally written off.
Oh no, not at all. Like, comedians in general are, well, yeah, Peterson will kind of talk about this, that comedies is an endangered, comedians are an endangered species maybe in this particular landscape, because supposedly what's so great about comedy is that you could say more or less anything and make a joke out of it, and that's your job, right? But that now, because people are incapable of taking a joke, you can't do it. So that's why Titania DeGrasse has her her audience.
Yeah. I often say, we like ethics and virtue used to be about cultivating a big heart, and now it's about cultivating a thin skin. And it's just a race. It's a race to be outraged from everybody else. It's just crazy. And so the IDW is a kind of a community that, even if it's not broadly known, yet it does say that there is
a mood. It's a mood. They're capturing a feeling,
Yeah. And why I brought up the John Cleese thing is that in survey after survey, English people are sort of asked, are you happy with the direction that this country is going in, and do you think that things have changed for the better, for the worse? And consistently, something like 65, two-thirds of people say, no, I'm very worried about this. But the moment that anyone says that out loud, with any kind of platform, and they are instantly derided as bigoted and Islamophobic or racist or
exactly, right,
whatever else it is. So maybe that's one thing that the ascent of Jordan Peterson says about our culture. Is there anything else about the culture do you think that he's putting his finger on or tapping into?
Well, I mean, a lot of things that have been talked about at length elsewhere. I think fatherlessness is a major piece in this, and a number of the conversations that I'll hear Paul having will be with young guys who either their father died when they were young, or the father was distant, or they didn't have a great relationship with their father. So Doug Wilson put it, he said North America needs a dad, or as Eric Weinstein put it, we have an uncle shortage. It's like you need the strong, authoritative male figure who can come along and sort of put the hand on the guy's shoulder and say, hey, you gotta pull yourself together here. And the way I like to think of it is, it's sort of like the mom says, hey, clean your room, and they're not going to clean the room when mom says it, because mom always says it. That's mom's job. But Jordan Peterson comes along and says, hey, clean your room. Go, oh my gosh, wow, clean my room. I never thought of that before. What a great idea. Mom is like, that's what I've been saying. And so I think it's sort of like the analogy that I like to think of is a young kid who's maybe kind of a delinquent, sort of rebellious type, and then he's got that one teacher in school, or maybe that one coach who really cares, and he cares enough to sort of take the kid aside and say, hey, you got to pull yourself together, and
you are not fine the way that you are.
You are not fine the way you are. You're talking smack to your mom, and that's not cool. Come on, seriously, buck up, bucko. And so Peterson is that way. There's a young comedian, like radio personality named Theo Vaughn, I think his name is. And he did an interview with Peterson, and he said, I feel like you were the guy who came along when our mom, when it's like dad had run away, and you were like the stepdad who comes in and actually cares about our mom, which I thought was a really a sweet, profound psychological kind of insight. It really kind of resonates on a big level.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you think the Peterson phenomenon says about the church then? Because we've been banging on about some of these things anyway. We talk about father hunger, and we talk about the Father in heaven.
Sure.
Why have we not gotten across in the same way that he has?
I think it's a multivariate problem. There's so many factors here, and it's so hard to talk about the church as if it's a monolithic entity when it's so not. There's so many different factions, and so I think the Peterson phenomenon, it could sort of speak to different kinds of things that different parts of the church may have been getting wrong. And so it's like, on the one hand, I want to say, there's probably some things that the church could have done better. But on the other hand, I also want to say, I don't know that this could have been like helped exactly or predicted, because certain things about Peterson's appeal are just sort of like in the nature of Peterson, and
Yeah.
aren't exactly in the nature of church to provide. So like Peterson, like the fact that he's not a Christian, I think honestly is a big part of the appeal, is that he's the other. He's interesting, different. He's not just the same old, same old. And so obviously, no church person or Christian person can be the other. Otherwise, they would no longer be a Christian. So, so that's difficult. And I think evolution is a big sort of elephant in this room that a lot of people are sort of going around or tiptoeing around, because it's sort of exhausting debate that people don't want to have, and a lot of people have sort of given up on it. Like, oh, come on, can't we all just agree with the scientific consensus and move on? And and a few of us annoying maverick types are like, consensus. I'm not really not super big on that, but I think that is part of the draw, is that Peterson comes along, and he's a very sort of classic evolutionary thinker, and so he's like, well, okay, how can I try to key the Bible stories in to an evolutionary framework and see if I can create some kind of grand unifying theory and make it all synthesize this all together and make it make sense? Because I think a lot of people, even if they've walked away from the church because they feel like, oh, it's too dogmatic or constraining or fundamentalist or whatever, there's still like something about the biblical stories that might haunt them psychologically. And so Peterson was tapping into that haunting power of the Bible in that sort of fresh psychological way. And so that people feel like, oh, well, maybe there can be like a reconnecting worlds here. Like, maybe this is how I can really understand and tap into the deep well of biblical stories and what that does to me psychologically, without having to contradict science and whatnot. And so that, the idea of like what the science says or what the scientific consensus says, which of course we all know this is how it is and this is what we have to work with, and everything that we do has to be measured against that. That's a very, very deeply embedded presupposition in the academy, and then trickling down from the academy to the culture at large. So that, a lot of people just take it for granted now. And so then I think that part of the attraction of Peterson is that it's like, hey, you don't have to leave this taken for granted framework, but maybe you can have all this other stuff too. And that's another thing where, like somebody like me, if I'm being honest, I have to say, well, except I think there actually are objectively problems with the evolutionary paradigm. I don't even think actually that it's solid science. So I like can't honestly offer that to people. And, that might cause people to say, oh, well, in that case, never mind, see you later. And that's up to them, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But so, I mean, yeah, I offer that as one aspect of Peterson that maybe people haven't talked about as much, but that I think is part of it. The thing is, though, that, I mean, what makes Peterson most compelling, and what I think most people find compelling about him, the way he talks, like when he talks about human nature, like none of that, I think none of that really actually makes a whole lot of sense within an evolutionary framework. So,
Okay.
because I think there's like a duality there, because like one moment he'll be saying, yes, we're cousins of apes, and we used to be these primates years ago, and yakety yak. And next moment he's talking about, like, you have the power to choose good or evil, and
The
you're this and
spark
you're
of
that.
divinity, and yeah.
Spark of divinity and all that. I'm like, okay, I'm hearing two totally different stories here. These are not meshing at all.
Those two stories sit apparently comfortably within many Christian minds too, in terms of the cousins of apes and the spark of divinity.
I'm sorry to say it, but I think way too many Christians have not actually thought through very carefully all the implications of the evolutionary paradigm. A massive debate, of course, a massive conversation.
And you would describe yourself as sort of an old Earth creationist?
I think that would be, that's sort of where I would place myself. I don't claim to have a sort of step-by-step, paint-by-numbers guide, like, okay, here's the exact order in which God had his bouts of creativity, and he made this first, and then he made that, and this is connected to the other thing in this way. But I don't feel like I have to. I'm content with a certain amount of mystery in precisely how all of that came together. And I disagree with the idea that I need to come up with a step-by-step model to present as like a counter model to the evolutionary model. In terms of the philosophy of science, I don't think that's true at all. But I do think part of the problem, and this gets into, how this might speak to problems in the church. What's happened in the church that I see is a sort of radical split between people who are like all in with the young Earth creationism and the answers in Genesis type school on the one hand, and then on the other hand, people like the mainline denominations, for example, who are just like completely buying into the evolutionary paradigm, like, oh, come on, why can't you stupid Bible-thumping, fundagelical, science-phobic whatevers just get on board and catch up? And so that's an incredibly bitter divide in the church. And so I think a lot of young people growing up never even really learn about possible third ways, because all that they know of are these two radical binary options. And so then, as they grow up and they kind of drift away from church and they go to college and their professors are, presenting them the one-sided view of the evolutionary paradigm, that's what they'll sort of then drift towards. And that's very hard, I find, for them to come back from that, because they'll feel like, you're just trying to sell me something, and you're just desperate, and you're just grasping at straws, and you're fighting a losing battle. And I've seen the truth now. The blinders have been removed. And so what I would really like to see would be more people in the church, helping to educate kids and give them kind of a savvy perspective on the debate when they're much younger, so that they have the tools to go out and engage the debate in a nuanced way.
This is interesting. We weren't going to go here, but let's steer away from scientific arguments against it, because that could be a whole series of videos. But I take it that scientific arguments against Darwin are important to you. But let's focus on theological arguments against Darwin. Give me a couple of like bullet points on why theologically we can't go with the neo-Darwinian synthesis.
Oh, well, I think the problem of human exceptionalism is enormous here. So, yeah, I mean, there's no non-anthropologically disastrous way that I can see to to build a model where we have material continuity with the rest of the animal kingdom. I just don't see it. And I'll sometimes hear people say that they accept common descent, but maybe God guided it. And I quite honestly, I have no idea what they mean when they say that. Like, was God like the fairy godmother turning the lizards into the footmen?
That's what I mean about the spark of divinity and we're cousins with apes. This
Yeah,
thought sort of existing in people's heads. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And one way around it that I'll hear some Christians pontificating about is, oh well, like we aren't our bodies, we are a soul. My body is just a highly advanced primate. And I even heard William Lane Craig saying that, and I was like, oh no, gently takes Mike away from William Lane Craig, because it's like, no, Bill, no, no, no. But they'll have this idea that we really could have been this sort of soulless hominid walking around, and then one day God sort of beams down a soul into the soulless hominid, and bippity boppity boo, we're people. And I really have a problem with that, because I think it's in the nature and essence of man to be an embodied being. I am a Cartesian dualist, but I still believe that man is in essence a body and soul creature. And so I'm very concerned, theologically speaking. I think we need to reconnect with the sanctity of the body. Nancy Pearcey has a great book on this called Love Thy Body, which I would highly recommend. So yeah, I think that's a big problem. Let's see, I could probably think of others. Oh well, the question of the fall, or of Adam and Eve. And this is a major confusion that I see, because so many people will sort of link together a young Earth with the historical Adam and Eve, like that you have to have those two together. But I disagree with that. I mean, like I tend to think that the evidence favors an old Earth, but I don't see that in contradiction with Adam and Eve being literally the first two human progenitors. And yeah, I think in order for the redemption to make sense, it really has to go back to the first Adam and Eve falling to kick off the fallen redemption arc. And I've also seen people try to come up with alternate ways around that, like, well, maybe there were other people outside the garden before Adam and Eve, but then when they sinned, their sin had like a trickle-down effect or something. And I mean, it turns into a theological mess of pottage, as far as I'm concerned.
Right, and so the place of Adam, and it becomes incredibly arbitrary to say that Adam is related to Aboriginal cultures, that are 12,000 miles away. God kind of zaps and imputes fallenness to them on behalf of this man who, post-dated them.
Right, exactly. So that those two, I think, so first being human exceptionalism. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? What does it mean for body and soul together to be stamped with Imago Dei? I think that gets lost in the evolutionary framework. And then secondly, the framework of fall and redemption, I think, unravels without a historical Adam and Eve.
Yeah. How did we get here? But no, it's. I think it is important, because I think one of the ways that I often describe Jordan Peterson is, yes, he's Jungian. I think he's even more deeply Darwinian, and therefore that kind of tempers the kind of hope that I have for him, because I have a lot of hope for him, and I pray for him to come and come to know Jesus. But it does seem to me that he's such a bottom-up thinker. And he gets that from Darwin. That's like, how do you bridge that gap from being bottom up to actually receiving the grace?
It's difficult. It's difficult. I have a good buddy of mine that I've been chatting back and forth about this with for about a year now. I like the way he puts it. He said, it's like Peterson is 1 inch away, but there's 100-foot wall in between.
Yeah.
But we were originally, what we were going to talk about was some of my writing, because he has been reading my stuff, and so maybe that's shows that there's hope for him, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he had this kind of conversation with Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager kind of waxed lyrical in the introduction and said, you're not just a bright man, you're also a good man. And then Jordan Peterson did the thing that we love Jordan Peterson for, which
Bless his heart.
bless his heart. And I guess he's learnt this from Dostoevsky. Who's he learnt this from? That he knows how terrible he could be.
Mm-hmm.
He has a real doctrine of sin, a real doctrine of fallenness and depravity. And he's just the most open kind of public speaker, Christian or not,
Yeah.
that I know on that issue. And he just wonderfully kind of took all the air out of that kind of
Yes.
very effusive introduction.
Yeah, and I mean, like, going back to what is it about his appeal? What does it say about the culture? I've said this before, but I think Bret Weinstein put this beautifully when he said there's a void of authenticity in the culture right now. And Peterson brings authenticity in spades, so that, like, even at the moment when he's being, like, so highly complimented, he's just like, yeah, I'm not going to go for that. I'm not actually going to take that compliment right now, you know?
Yeah. And I've seen videos before where kind of he and Ruben and Ben Shapiro have been on the show, and Ruben has sort of said, you know, what are your major weaknesses? And actually, and they all go around the room, and Ruben and Shapiro's weaknesses are relatively shallow things. And Peterson just bears his soul about, I could have been a prison camp guard. I could have been, you know, I probably would have been. Like, yeah.
I was a would-be school shooter. Yeah.
So that massively endears us to him. But then he wants us to, you know, stand up with our shoulders back and clean our rooms. And I've often thought about Peterson that I wonder what it will do to the buckos, to those who, you know, hear his message and do clean up their rooms, where they will be in 2 years' time.
Exactly.
When they realize there's only so much you can do by cleaning your room, and, you know, I'm still left with me, and I'm still left with this bundle of contradictions. And so I have been worried about those who listen to Peterson. More recently, I've been worried for himself.
Yeah.
I think I had thought that Peterson was such an exceptional human being that it would be okay for him to preach a Pelagian message to people because he could do it. But he himself is realizing he can't do it.
Yeah.
But actually, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it is a good thing, right? And I mean, of course, multiple factors there, and most recently his wife's illness, which is just really heartbreaking. And I'll tell you a quick little story about this, which I think it just reflects so well on the man and also on his wife, that we have a little Facebook group for women who support Jordan B. Peterson. And it's a quite lively group, let me tell you.
Okay.
So there's a lady in the group who's a journalist, and she'd had like a little bit of email contact with Peterson in a sort of journalistic capacity. And so she like went around collecting, you know, messages from the group, good wishes before Peterson's wife had her surgery. And like within hours, both Peterson and his wife separately responded in person to say thank you. And I mean, my gosh, just such great people. But yeah, that's been an enormous strain on him, I think, emotionally. And so he's just, he seems to be running down, and I don't know where that's going to lead. But then also, yeah, and this was what I touched on in the article that he shared out, and what he then went into when he was speaking to Prager, is the burden of one's own nature, and well, that's the burden that all humanity bears. That's the burden of being, is knowing what you are and not being exactly sure what you can do about it in your own strength. But just try to do the best you can and hoping that will be enough.
And he's realizing that it's not.
That's right.
And Prager asked that question that keeps getting asked him. You know, you say you don't believe in God. You act as though he exists. And Peterson, probably, it's the most raw I've seen him in answering that question, in sort of saying, who could possibly say they believe in God? Because to say you believe in God is to say that you aim for the highest, even though, you know, you're embroiled in malevolence and blah, blah, blah. Who could possibly say they believe? And for him, believe just came across as this crushing burden that he wanted to distance himself from. And so your article is just beautiful. We'll put links to it. Jordan Peterson and the Unbearable Task. And let me just read a little bit of how you close out that article. You say, what is the unbearable burden of being the unbearable burden? Is it the pain we carry, or is it the pain we force others to carry? Is it our suffering or our malevolence? And if it is our malevolence, how then shall this burden be lifted? How shall the damned spot be wiped out? How, if we try very hard as we can, to tear off the dragon's skin and find more dragon skin beneath? I will pay, you say. I have paid, I am paying, and I will pay, except you can't, because someone else already paid. Boom, and here comes the gospel, Esther. You know, your sorrowing parents and grandparents already paid, your wife already paid, your brother and sister already paid, the unborn child who is not here already paid. So, well, here's the law, right? Here's the law. Right. Our hand has rent the fabric of reality. A hand not ours must mend it. Our hand has stained the foundations of the earth. A hand not ours must wash it clean. Here is the great good news. This is beautiful law and gospel. Here we go. Not that we can pretend that we can undo the deed, not that we can pretend that we can forget, even as we are forgiven, but still we are forgiven. Beneath this cross, how can we dare to stand? Before this throne, how can we dare to come? Shall we tarry till we're better? Shall we ever come at all? I believe I cannot manage. That's beautiful. I cannot manage the unbearable task. I cannot bear the unbearable burden. I can only bear the burden that is left when the hand, not mine, has lifted it. And I believe that is enough. That's beautiful stuff, Esther. That is beautiful stuff.
Thank you.
And
thanks, Ben.
Yeah, and then Jordan Peterson tweets it out. Was it like on this and said, did he say I really liked this? Or
he just said I liked this column. Yeah, I can
I
kind of hear
it. Yeah. I liked this column. And when I saw him say I liked this column, I just thought to myself, you know, if he ever did convert, that is the kind of thing he would say in order to signal it.
Well, I mean, to be honest, we writers think about these things, you know. So I kind of had that in mind, because I was sort of thinking of, because the part of what sort of attracted me to him was how the way that he speaks, you know, he speaks with this complete lack of cynicism about him, where he's just sort of like all in, and he'll talk about good and evil and the struggle, and so I wanted to meet that, you know. I kind of want to match that, and because it's like, yeah, this is a game of good and evil, this is a game of life and death, and you have to use this kind of language when you speak about it. There's no way around it, you know. But yeah, that is the gospel, you know. And I mean, when he talks about like who could say I believe, he wants, it's like he wants a cross, you know. There's an old hymn, Am I a Soldier of the Cross? There's a verse that says, must I be carried to the skies on flowery beds of ease, while others fought to win the prize and sailed through bloody seas. And Peterson is like, where's the bloody sea? Like, where is it? God damn it! I want it. It's like he wants a bloody sea to swim across. Like he wants a cross. He wants a task. You know,
he wants to be Christ.
Well, in a way, right? Exactly. And so he kind of understands that there's the Christian idea of following Christ or picking up your cross, which there is, that's true, but it has to be placed within the gospel framework, because there is still a particular cross that Christ bore, which we cannot in our nature bear. But there is still a cross. And there's another old hymn called Must Jesus Bear the Cross Alone? And the verse goes, must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free? No, there's a cross for everyone. And there's a cross for me. So that's what I hope Peterson can realize is, you know, like the gospel is not about like, oh, hooray, Jesus did all the work, so I don't have to. Yay, you know, we're done here, going home now. It's like, no, there is still work. You know, like what does Bonhoeffer say? When God calls a man, he bids him come and die. So don't worry, Jordan. There's still work for you to do. There's still a cross that you have to bear, but you don't have to bear this cross. You really don't. It's really okay, you know.
In some ways, he's already got a kind of that understanding, in that he will talk about the gratitude that we ought to have for, you know, the lights are on and civilization is functioning. Right. And it's a bloody miracle that, you know, here we are.
Yes.
So he kind of does get this sense that there is a grace that sets us on our feet, and that impels us to engage with the wildness of the world out there. But I guess he just needs a more robust and Christian and theological sense of, the grace that actually sets you on your feet, not to zap you up to paradise, but to actually, help you to engage with the struggle and the fight that Christ wants you to, to have in this world. What would you say to Jordan if you paid through the neck to have more than 90 seconds? Imagine you had 90 minutes with him. I don't know how we'd crowdfund enough money for you to do that.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's the status rocket again. He's up there and I'm down here.
But you've been retweeted by him, so
I've been retweeted by him, so that's my ticket, man. That's about the best I can do. Well, I mean, I would say everything I said in that article, but I already said it to him, so that's great. Like,
That's amazing, yeah.
Yeah. I think that what I would try to help him understand is that the statement of belief, like what it means to say I believe. Well, expanding more on what I was getting at the end of the article is it's belief in God the way that the child believes in a parent. It's like I believe that this loving father loves me and has my best good at heart. I believe that he has sent Christ to be the perfect sacrifice, and I believe that I cannot but love him back. I cannot but serve him as best I know how, knowing that it will be an imperfect offering because that's all that I have to give. It's sort of like, okay, here's this debt that you can't possibly pay. God will pay it for you, but you have this penny jar, and God says, no, bring your penny jar. It's actually really good and important that you bring your penny jar. And it's not so much about the pennies per se, but about like what it does in you to bring the pennies, And so I think what I would say to Peterson is that he can do all that he's been doing, but if he does it to the glory of God, then there will be a freedom in that. There will be a liberation in that the heavy weight has been lifted. And it's like he doesn't have to bear the weight of the world on his shoulders. And he's that sort of wounded doctor, and it's like, Jordan, the position has been filled. The position has been filled.
But that's the trouble, because he's always psychologizing the Bible, and therefore the Christ figure is me.
Exactly. I know. That's the difficulty. I think I would also, what else I would say to him is I would try to convey the hope of the resurrection, the resurrection hope, because I think that, the best that you can get out of Jordan Peterson's system is a really good death, okay, well, at least you die with some nobility, with some dignity, and the family is gathered around and they're not fighting, and they're honoring the memory. And then, I mean, that's it. And the ones left standing carry on, and that's the best that you can do. And it's like, oh no, there's got to be more than that. There is more than that, and that's the thing. That's Christ at the same time weeping with Mary and Martha, yet also raising Lazarus.
But he does seem addicted to the tragic view of life, and I think even in the Prager video, he kind of talked about, once you embrace the tragic view of life, you can actually be happier because you expect the suffering. Whereas actually in his biblical lectures, in the very first one, he said the Bible is a comedy, which is strange and is remarkable that you've got these 66 documents written over 1,500 years by 40 different authors, and somehow they tell one plot line and it ends on a high. It ends with a happily ever after. I would love him to do some more thinking on why it is he thinks that the Bible is a comedy, but he thinks life is a tragedy.
You've got a great point there. I think he would say, well, I don't know what it all means. Yeah. It's like he doesn't understand what the resurrection means. And I kind of like, so I did pay through the nose one time last year, and I did get like a quick question in, and where I was sort of trying to get at this, like, do you feel like your project really offers as much hope as the Christian story? fully embraced,
Yeah.
And he kind of danced around it and sort of landed at the place that he felt like he would be, he felt like he would be talking above his pay grade if he said more at this point in time, which I fully respect,
Yep.
and I fully get.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's got to do some more thinking, and if he does come to Christ, it will probably be as a sort of Kierkegaardian leap, a sort of a leap across the depths, or the fathoms, which I feel like ideally the heart and the mind should be united, should be in sync. I think that's how we were created to be. But everyone's different, and Peterson kind of has to find his own path. But I long for him to feel Christ's hand on his shoulder, because that's when you're like Mary Magdalene and you're weeping outside of the tomb on Sunday morning, and then Christ calls your name,
Mary. Wow.
Mary. That's like for me, for my money, the most beautiful moment in the whole of Scripture. It's just that moment he calls her Mary, that she says Rabboni, and that's that catastrophe, man. That catastrophe.
So how did you come across your article? Like, you just...
Oh well, I've been spamming his email. No, not really. So it's very mundane, and but Patheos, the big platform that I write for, they kind of work with Google, I think, so that if somebody writes an article for a few days, it will kind of show up as a news headline along with other headlines if you do a search for the keyword. And so, if you search Jordan Peterson, then like for the first couple of days after I wrote that article, it would have been floating around as news having to do with Jordan Peterson in a Google search. So either he himself or somebody who works with him every day, goes through those kinds of headlines, probably also checking to see if there are any new hit pieces that he needs to respond to, and then they pull those out and he calls through them and clearly personally reads them a lot of the time. And then if he likes it, he reshares it.
Amazing.
And it's funny because he's done this with 3 of my articles now, actually, all from my personal blog, though. And I've written articles about him for places like Quillette and The Federalist, which have way wider readership than my little blog. But it's funny, like, for whatever reason, he hasn't picked up on those, but he's picked up on the ones from my blog, which I'm not complaining with, because I get paid per view on Patheos. And so, when I get a Peterson spike, it's like, oh boy, here we go. I'll finally be able to afford Girl Scout.
Happy meal tonight.
Exactly. I can actually say yes when the Girl Scout cookies come to my door.
So what's been the response? I mean, so you paid for one kind of chat with Peterson. Have you had any other, like...
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really a chat. It was the VIP thing where you shake his hand and you get a question and Q&A. So what, by response, you mean like from other readers or Peterson fans, or?
Yeah, I mean, so he hasn't been in touch at all, or you haven't got any access to the man up in the stratosphere? No.
Nope, I don't have access to the man himself. But what has been really nice is seeing over the past months or so how other people who like Peterson have responded to my writing, including people who aren't Christians. And those, I am always kind of trying to pay attention to those reactions and trying to figure out what I did right. And not which might sound like, ooh, what's the magic formula? Okay, better write that down and do it again. But it's just trying to keep my finger kind of on the pulse. And I've been really gratified to see atheists and skeptics and non-believers who say, I'm still a skeptic, but this really touched me, or this really made me think, or wow, this like the way one guy put it with this latest one, he said, well, that broke it down, and I had to go take a walk. Now, like after reading that.
I saw that. Yeah.
Then there was a different guy who emailed me after the thing I wrote on Liberty University, which Peterson actually tweeted that one twice, which he must have really liked that one, which was such a heart-rending moment when that young man rushed up on stage and made his sort of plea for help. So I wrote my thing on that, and then I got a nice email from a skeptical guy who said, I have a master's degree in classics, and I've been sort of taught to tear religion up one side and down the other. But after reading this piece, I wonder if I should, because that really sort of touched something in me deeply. And so I was like, cool, man. I mean, if you like what I'm doing, then keep going. And so, I mean, I'm not here to say that I have this all figured out in terms of like, aha, okay, church, here's how I did it. Now you go out and do this exact thing, because I don't have a thing, I don't have a formula or a recipe. I feel like it, outreach can't work that way, because once people try to make it into a formula, then it's like obviously detectable that you're trying to use a formula. And that's counterproductive. But I hope, I'm glad for the work that my writing has done. I'm glad that it's finding an audience, and I hope that it can continue to help, and it can continue to do so. And I think I can help. I might be able to help pastors somewhat. So this Federalist piece that I wrote, Jordan Peterson isn't anti-Christian. He's a noble pagan. So I was responding to this piece that a Lutheran pastor had written, which was a sort of somewhat cranky piece where he's like, well, Peterson, he's like the head pastor of First Church YouTube, and he seems like a sort of a would-be Gnostic prophet type, and he wants to lead people away from the church, and it's like, I really think that's a misread, and so I tried to kind of go through and engage with this guy. But I think part of the problem is that pastors, a lot of people have limited amounts of bandwidth time to listen deeply to Peterson, because I mean, they're pastoring, right? And I get it, they've got a life, they've got stuff to do. But it might be helpful if they could listen to people like Paul Vanderklay, or maybe you, or people like me who are like, listen, I have listened in depth to this guy. I have talked a lot with his fans, and I think this isn't quite getting it right. Here's some ideas. And so I did write something, 5 lessons Jordan Peterson has taught the church, that I think could be a beginning place to start to talk through some of these things. So for whatever it's worth, hopefully it's worth something. I put my stuff out there and hope it finds an audience.
Yeah, let's put a link to that as well. So what's next for Esther O'Reilly?
What's next? Oh my gosh. Let's see. Well, I'd like to write. I really like to write some more about Douglas Murray, because that's something that I haven't touched on as much, but I'd like to write something for the public discourse about atheists who are pro-life, or have a sort of an instinct towards life. And I think Murray is an important part of that conversation. I'd also like to write something. So there's a character named John Vervaeke, who's a Canadian colleague of Peterson's, and he's sort of like the crazy Buddhist uncle of the intellectual dark web. Not nearly as well known as Peterson, but he's been doing lectures on the meaning crisis that Paul's been picking up. And he's had some comments about personhood recently that I was sort of picking up on, and I feel like it could open up space for me to kind of lay out some of my thoughts on the danger of divorcing personhood from the idea of a human being. And so I might pitch that to an outlet like Art Digital or something, which is a spot I haven't written for yet. And also, I hopefully either later this year or next year, this big anthology, Understanding Jordan Peterson and Critical Analysis, will be coming out, and that's been edited by Ron Dart, who's a Canadian academic. So I've got an essay in there, and which I'm pretty proud of. And I called it Jordan Peterson as Humanist. And so that will sort of unfold my philosophy of Christian humanism, and how I think Peterson's work affords an opportunity to dig more deeply into that, like what it means to be a Christian humanist, top down, so to speak, like a fully integrated humanist. So quite excited about that, to see what that will do. And there's other nice pieces in that anthology. So Alistair Roberts has written a thing. He's a good egg. He's great. Different people. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we'll put some links in the show notes to a few of those pieces that you just mentioned about how Christians can wrap their head around this phenomenon and take advantage of its depth, deepen their own understanding of the scriptures and their own understanding of people and how to connect with people as well. Because I think that's something that Peterson really helps us with. But yeah, no, you've really served us well in all that writing and speaking that you do, Esther.
Thank you.
Yeah, pointing us back to Jesus, and just this article that Peterson liked. Amazing that he liked it.
Amazing.
Just a textbook law and gospel kind of presentation, and it's reminded me to pray for the man, and we shall see. We
shall see. All in God's good time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Esther, it's been great. Thank you for sparing the time.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless.